Starting a vegetable garden is really exciting. I'm so excited for you because that first year where everything is new can be so magical and so engaging. But on the other hand, it can be so overwhelming and frustrating, especially when things don't work out the way that you think that they should. And so my recommendation today is going to help you stay in that sweet spot between super excited and overwhelmed so that you are not too far to either side, because I think gardening should be super fun, but it should be a little challenging. And if you don't challenge yourself, you might end up bored, which is something that we don't want to do, because we want to make sure that you are able to come back to this garden year after year. And this isn't one of those things where you start it this year and next year you're like, whatever, that didn't work out for me. I'm not a gardener. I obviously have a black thumb. We don't want any of that for you. We want you to have a good experience where you grow something awesome and you feel really excited about it in the end. So if this is your first year thinking about starting a vegetable garden, I'm going to assume that you probably have a small space to work with. Most people that I see start out vegetable gardening have maybe 1 or 2 raised beds in their backyard, and that is okay. If you have a much larger space and you want to start a huge vegetable garden for the first time, that is a lot of motivation that you have. And I think that's great, but I will caution you that if you've never grown vegetables before, a larger space, more than like 2 4x8 raised beds, might get really overwhelming for you. And if you are like really prepared and ready to put a lot of time into your garden, you can start with a larger space. But if it's your first year, I recommend starting a little bit smaller, and then like once you have that experience, working up to that more space that you might have available. So if you are starting with a small amount of space, that means that you don't have room for a lot of different things in your garden. So you're going to have to be kind of selective in what you choose to grow versus what you put off until you either have more experience or more space. And making that decision is the topic, like the main thing I'm going to be talking to you about today. So the first thing I want you to do when you're thinking about what should I grow in my vegetable garden is to look at the vegetables that you buy from the store. You don't want to end up growing something that you have never ever eaten before, because on top of the stress of getting it to grow well enough, you're not going to know what it's supposed to look like. You're not going to know how to cook it. And I think it's going to add a lot more overwhelm than you necessarily need to take on in your very first year gardening. So start out with things that you might normally buy from the store to plant in your garden. Now, that's not to say that your garden needs to be boring. That is also very sad. If you spend all this time working to grow this red bell pepper that you could just go buy from the store, and yours ends up smaller than the one that you could buy from the store, and that's all that you're growing, you might feel really defeated, and that's also not what we want. So balance. You're going to hear a lot of that from me, is trying to find the balance between growing things that you're going to eat and growing things that are interesting. So my recommendation for you, like I said, we're going to start with what you would buy at the grocery store and go from there. So if you make a list of all the things that you might buy from the grocery store that are fresh vegetables, we'll start with that. And the next thing you want to do is think about which of these vegetables would do well in my climate. I'm not going to go over all of the specifics about this vegetable for this climate and this one for this climate, but I am going to tell you how to figure that out for yourself in your climate, because if I went into the details of all of that, this would be like a 3-hour video. So if you want to figure this out for yourself, I highly kind of recommend Googling such and such vegetable and growing conditions, and matching up the growing conditions to what your weather is actually like. I think for most of you, you're going to find that there are 2 main sections of vegetables that you have. You're going to have the warm weather stuff and the cool weather stuff. Warm weather stuff is like your tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and green beans and stuff like that. And then in the cool weather section, you might have your broccoli, your cauliflower, your Brussels sprouts, things like that. So if you're a first-time vegetable grower, you are probably thinking more about the spring and summer gardening season coming up rather than the fall cool weather gardening season coming up. So if that's what you have in mind, great. If you were thinking you could grow broccoli and tomatoes at the same time, that's a hard lesson to learn, but better to hear it from me than to actually see it happen in your garden. I actually, in my first year gardening, tried to grow broccoli in the middle of summer, and I had no idea why it wasn't working out. And it turns out broccoli is just not a heat-loving plant. It would rather grow in the fall and into a mild winter than in the middle of the summer. So once you've got all of that climate information figured out, you're going to have to take a look at which plants can actually fit in the space that you have. Some plants grow larger than others and need more room to produce. Some plants are going to need a vertical support or a trellis of some kind. Some plants don't need that at all. And these are the things that you should consider when you're looking at your space and the things that you want to plant. My recommendation to you is to try for at least 2 of each plant that you are trying to grow, because you never know when something's going to happen to one of them, whether it's a pest or for me, it's my cat laying on it and snapping the stem in half. So having a backup can be a really great option. And it just kind of helps you to see a little bit of the variation in how the same plant can grow, because this is nature, biology, and even with the same starting conditions, the outcome is not going to be exactly the same. And so the sooner you can start kind of seeing the little variations in things as they're growing, the faster that you can expand your gardening knowledge, and the easier it'll be for you to tell if something's doing well or not in the coming years. All right, so we started with vegetables that you already buy from the store to put in your garden. Now, to balance that out and not get bored or sad that it looks exactly like what you bought in the store, we're going to take a little bit of this second column over here, which is interesting things that are really exciting looking and that make you really want to grow stuff. So that could be maybe a different variety of something that you already buy from the store that you've never seen. So for me, that is a different variety of eggplant. Those big ones that you get in the store are kind of tough and not super easy to cook. So I started growing little long ones, specifically Nagasaki long eggplants. And it's something I can't get at the store, but it's still an eggplant, so I know how to cook it because I've cooked with regular eggplants before. Well, regular. The ones that are available in the store. And so it's a little more interesting for me. It's something that I can't get at the store, but it's something that I still recognize. And when it is harvestable, I know how to use it in my kitchen and my cooking. I have the existing recipes, and so I can actually enjoy what I have grown. You could also tip the scale a little bit further this way if you wanted and grow something that you don't recognize but still seems really awesome. I would maybe make that only 1 or 2 plants in your whole garden for your very first year vegetable gardening, because if you have too much stuff that you don't have any idea, again, what it looks like, how to cook it, then you're going to end up more frustrated than if you're growing things that you recognize, you understand how they look when they're ripe and things like that, you know how to cook it. Then you're going to have a much better time in your first year gardening. So you can choose, and I do recommend that you choose things that are interesting and cool that maybe you haven't seen before, or varieties of things you haven't seen before that you already know about, in order to make your garden interesting and fun. But don't go too overboard with this. It is really easy to do because maybe you get this seed catalog or you see those cool plants in the store that are already started and you're like, oh, that looks so cool. I would love to grow it. So keep that in mind. A little bit of this, a lot more of this, so that we try to keep these things balanced. Okay, and then the last thing that I would recommend thinking about when you're planning your very first vegetable garden is to think about flowers. This is something that a lot of first-time gardeners don't think about building into their garden, but it can make your garden much prettier, and it can also help increase the number of pollinators that are around in your garden to help pollinate the flowers of the different fruits that you might be trying to grow. A really good starter flower for your vegetable garden is a marigold. You can find started marigolds at most plant nurseries, and they are pretty. They come in a lot of different colors. They're also kind of double duty because in addition to being a pretty flower, they also repel certain kinds of pests, and that can be a benefit to your garden. When you're planting for flowers, they also take up a lot less space than an entire tomato plant or pepper plant, for example. So you can kind of scatter them around your garden in those little spaces where you might not have enough room for another huge plant. All right, and that is the short and sweet of planting your very first vegetable garden. If you are a new gardener, I do have an entire series of videos that I'm building just for you guys. It is called Gardening Basics, and I will link it somewhere here for you to go watch. Congrats on starting a garden. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I wish you happy gardening.